So as I think I might have mentioned, and perhaps people have said something about it to you lately, today is Mother's Day. And so the talk is about Mother Nature, which is about mothers, but it's also about the nature of the mother process. So I just want to start by saying that such is the nature of life, that all it asks, all it wants is the opportunity to appear. You are that opportunity, I am that opportunity, and so it is. And these words are the ones that Kennedy Schultz, who founded the Religious Science Church in Atlanta, started every celebration with. Such is the nature of life that all it asks, all it wants is the opportunity to appear. You are that opportunity, I am that opportunity, and so it is. So it's easy to think, oh, life is unfolding. It's a happy, gentle, easy, wonderful thing. Sometimes it is. Sometimes there's some challenges that are involved in that as well. And I like to look at nature for some reminders and some indicators about what's going on. So you might have heard that the cicadas, which come around every summer, are coming around in force this summer because they're on a cycle. There's a 13-year brood of cicadas, and there's a 17-year brood of cicadas, and there are others that are on different patterns. And the 13-year cicadas and the 17-year cicadas are both going to be out at the same time this year. And this has cicada experts just enthralled. The last time it happened was 221 years ago. And you say, wow, that seems to be a long time. But if you think about it from a scientific standpoint or a mathematical standpoint, 13 and 17 are both prime numbers, not divisible by anything. So if you take 13 times 17, guess what it comes out to be? 221. Yes, it is. So, and the next time it's going to happen? Yeah. Well, that's one of the things the scientists are a little bit concerned about, because there's an overlap area where, like in Illinois, where both broods are going to be out at the same time. And what happens if they get together with each other? What's going to happen to the timing? What could? To which the answer is, shut up. Because 221 years ago, it was not called Illinois, but it was still there. And the overlap happened before. And you know what? They made it. It's going to be okay. That's what happens with nature. It's going to unfold somehow. When we can't imagine that things can possibly get any better, the problem is not with the things. The difficulty is not in the possibilities. The limitation is in what we can imagine. So that's worth remembering as we're looking at a situation and projecting, oh, I can't imagine how this could possibly get any better. Well, get a new imagination, because all sorts of things are possible. We think of nature as being this creative, wonderful, blossoming process. We look at flower gardens. We've got the tulips and the irises that are coming up, and there's people who are planting gardens, myself included, looking forward to summertime vegetables and those sorts of things. And it seems like it's such an organized, lovely, wonderful thing. Yeah? Anybody ever seen an abandoned house? Mm-hmm. And what happens? There's trees growing out of the gutters. There's plants coming up through the pavement. The pavement, okay? This used to be a driveway, and now suddenly it's got grass and bushes and stuff coming up. Such is the nature of life, that all it asks, all it wants is the opportunity to appear. And that's what it looks like. I happen to live about a block and a half away from an iconic Frank Lloyd Wright house. There are 4 of them in Pennsylvania. One of them is in Ardmore around the corner from my house. It's called Skytop. And it's Frank Lloyd Wright's interpretation of a Philly row house, which is really kind of cool. The interesting part is that as you walk by, you really can't see it, but then again, that's Frank Lloyd Wright's whole thing. So it's there. There are actually 4 units that are in there, and they've been there since the 50s. And on the one hand, it's really cool. And on the swale between the sidewalk and the street, usually there's just a little bit of grass, and that's where the water main connection is. And these houses, they've planted irises. So there's this huge bank of irises that come up there. But there was a problem with one of the houses. I think there was a fire, so it's not inhabited at this point. And the irises are about yay high. And the thistle is about yay high. And there's a lot more thistle than there is irises. And you think, oh, well, that just happens with a house that's, somebody's not paying attention. If there's a Frank Lloyd Wright house, 4 of them in Pennsylvania. So people are paying attention, and still, that's what happens with nature. You know, these houses have been there for a long time, and they've got some wooden fences in there, and over the winter, when one of those ice storms came through, a tree came down and knocked down a piece of the fence, and it's sort of sitting there waiting for repairs with some rotten wood going on. And that's how life happens. That's how life happens. We get to continuously cultivate the new things that we want to be experiencing in our life, and acknowledge that Mother Nature, while wonderful and infinitely abundant, is not always gentle. We were talking before the celebration today about the aurora. It is possible to go outside at night, if it's not cloudy, and see the northern lights. And normally the northern lights are the sort of thing that you would go to Norway or Alaska for. In fact, our friend Michelle Whittington, who is very much a Phoenix girl and does not like the cold, a couple of years ago went to Fairbanks, Alaska, just so that she could see them. Froze her parts and had a wonderful time seeing them. Who knew that this year you could see them in Orlando? And it's like, well, that's a really cool thing, you know, to be able to see them, and there they are. It turns out that the reason we can see the northern lights now is because there is a solar activity area on the surface of the sun, a sunspot, if you will. And there's a lot of activity that's going on in this sunspot. This particular area on the sun is, I believe, 16 times the size of the Earth. So it's not a small thing, and it's having all of these electromagnetic events, and it's jettisoning star stuff out into space towards us. And by the way, when that gets to our atmosphere, that's what makes the pretty northern lights happen. It's wonderful. Anybody who's had any difficulties with their GPS or their cell phone in the last few days, it's probably the same solar activity, because it's wreaking havoc with the electronics. And, you know, yeah, Mackie's saying, yep, got that going on. Such is the nature of life, that all it asks, all it wants is the opportunity to appear. It might be appearing as something wonderful, like a bouquet of tulips, or it might be showing up as solar flares that are knocking out satellite communication. That's the process of bringing something new into experience. That's what birthing looks like. I've had the blessing to work in the office next to a childbirth educator for the last, well, since before the pandemic and going back 30 years before that. So I have heard a fair number of childbirth classes about families who are preparing for motherhood and fatherhood, and the transition, the change that happens when you go from being a couple to being a family. One of the things that I have noticed is that every mother has a birth story. If you ask any mother, what was it like when this child, that child, or the other child was born, they remember. And they can share in vivid detail. And in some cases, unless stopped, they will. By the way, when somebody tells you that they're expecting their first child, don't share the birth story. Hold off, say, oh, that's wonderful, and think, I know something you don't know. But because that's what the process is about. Because we think that, you know, the birth story is about, oh, we're going to have a baby, and it's going to be so wonderful, and we're going to have a family, and there's the morning sickness, and then there's all the delivery issues, and the swollen ankles, and the rest of that. And oh, by the way, after that precious bundle of joy is born, nobody gets any sleep for like a year. Cranky, sleep-deprived people who were expecting something different. And that's okay. That's okay. That's the way it works. And that mothering process is not just for moms who are having a baby. That's the same process that happens all the time. So Alan Cohen was talking about in the reading as he was birthing this book. If he knew what he knew now, then he might not have done it, or might have done it differently. But that's the idea. There's a concept, that conception. Ah, I have this idea. This idea is now growing inside of me. It's turning into something. It's gestating. It is evolving. It is getting ready to be born and released into the world. And then at some point when it's ready, we get to blossom and bring that newness in. And sometimes it's as wonderful as we had imagined. And sometimes there's some birth pains, And sometimes there's some postpartum depression. What have I done? What have we done? Yeah. Being the father involved in this, there's always the possibility of getting blamed when it's not going right. It's like, okay, that's why we want you in the room. If somebody's going to get yelled at, it should be dad, rather than the doctor or any of the technician. That's one of my thoughts. But then after that newness has come into being, there is an opportunity for nurturing, for care, for sharing of self, for encouraging that newness to come into its fullness. And that's the same whether we're raising a child, or starting a business, or having a relationship, or inventing something, or in any way reaching out beyond what we have done before. We're going to support, and we're going to encourage, and we're going to nurture, and we're going to cultivate that newness, that goodness that we brought about. And then the other piece that nobody tells moms about ahead of time is the surrender part, the letting go. Because, yeah, well, there's a certain amount of entitlement. That's my idea. That's my baby. This life lived inside of me for 9 months. It owes me something. No, it doesn't. Such is the nature of life, that all it asks, all it wants is the opportunity to appear. That new idea, that new baby, is that newness. And it keeps on showing up in new and different ways. And if it's exactly what we wanted, good for us. And if it's not, then good for us, we get to learn something new, something different, to understand that whatever it is that we've started, it's now moving out on its own. And that's Mother Nature. So what are you mothering? What is it that you're cultivating, nurturing? What is it that you're getting ready to bring into existence, or have already started bringing into existence? What's that next step for you? What does it look like when it's working perfectly, when you've got that new, successful, rich, wonderful family, or business, or book, or experience, or song? What does it look like? We're all constantly involved in this process of mothering something new and creating something new. As I said before, and this came from a meditation this week, when we can't imagine that things can possibly get any better, the problem is not with the things. The difficulty is not in the possibilities. The limitation is in our imagination. So I close by saying, imagine something fabulous. Open yourself up to a possibility greater and grander and more wonderful than you've ever considered possible. And that one infinite creative power that creates everything says yes, and the good unfolds. And so it is. Happy Mother's Day.